my journey in the social sector, to be honest, started the day I realized that I was so wrong in assuming that I was this meritorious person who studied hard and went to IIT and IIM and I slogged my bottom off in my job and so on and so forth. It was when I first was involved in a project to raise funds for a school for children of migrant workers. This was in the late 90s. And I got to meet these children, their families, the work that their parents were doing. And, that's when I realized that I was actually a product of what I call an ovarian lottery. Just having been born in the right place, मैं तो बड़ा सोचता था कि I cracked JEE. It's only when I realized, 90% of our country doesn't even speak English. And, you realize that actually you are in this very small set. So I would say that I'm very, that transformation happened when I realized, this idea that one was really a product of an ovarian lottery. And then it took me a little while, and then I switched to the social sector about a little over 10 years ago, having worked some 25 years in the corporate world. I was very fortunate to have started my journey at Azim Premji Foundation. Because when you come from the corporate, you come with the arrogance of, I've run a $2 billion balance sheet, I've managed 26 countries, I was the CEO of a large bank in a different country, and so on and so forth. And you think you're coming here to help the social sector. There's so much you have to offer. But it was the work that I did at Azim Premji Foundation. I was, fortunate to be able to work in the deepest corners of our country, in, villages in Barmet, to, of course, the Prime Minister's office in Lutyens, Delhi, and seeing that entire range of things. It was very humbling. It was very, and one got to actually understand that the complexity of the work one does in the social sector, in the corporate world, you don't even do 100 texts of, that complexity of the, work that we do. So I was very, very fortunate, and there were very good people, really amazing people I got to work with, talk to, from academia, from the practicing world, people who are associated in different ways, philanthropists, and got to learn from them that, boss, tumko kuch aata nahi. So nowadays, when my friends call me and say, I want to switch to the social sector, I want to bring all that I have to the social sector, I tell them, no, you have nothing to bring. If you want to get something, please come. And that is my honest view of, where one has reached in that journey at Azim Premji Foundation. And then I went off and did work in one school in a village for about a year. And that was completely transformational because, when you really get involved with community and the issues, and there are impossible problems, and you think you can solve them, and it was very easy when I was in my banking days, and that was a completely different. And it was just one school. And my friend Anand Gangola used to say that it is one thing to go to 1,000 schools, and it is another thing to go to one school 1,000 times. And that for me was the transformation journey of that 1 year in the one school. And during all this time, there were a lot of thinking, a lot of thoughts that one kept having. So just to talk about my initial work in the sector, right? First of all, like I told you, it was humbling. It was absolutely humbling. My idea of meritoriousness, my idea of competence, my idea of success, my idea of size and scale, everything got smashed during that time. I used to see amazing people doing amazing work in the most difficult of circumstances, working on the most complicated challenges, and it was extremely humbling. Again, at the risk of repeating, I don't think I ever had to do anything in the corporate world that was even 100 of that difficulty, complexity, challenge, scale, etc. But time and again, one would see these amazing organizations, but just struggling to scale, struggling to manage, collapsing because you couldn't do fundraising. You were not managing people. You were losing people. You didn't know how to leverage networks. You didn't know how to work with the government. You didn't know how to work with the markets. So many challenges. And I'm thinking, this is injustice. There's amazing people, know amazing things to do, but how do we make this work for larger sections of society? That is the core of my sort of fire in the belly. Boss, ye kyun ho raha hai? Of course, one recognized that this was a very, very complex space, and it was a very complex type of work. It was a complex set of aspirations, complex set of people, and a country like India, right? I mean, we know that within one district, you will see 5 languages and, 5 tribes and, so many religions and so many socio-economic divides and so many complex caste systems, at play. So I realized that, there was a lot of that, and this was a learning journey for me. And I also realized, and this was a humbling thing for me, that the ideas that I would come up with intuitively, having been in the corporate world, could be very, very dangerous if they were applied into the social sector on an as-is where-is basis. So this recognition of the dangers of corporate management in the sector. And while this is happening, I'm also seeing what I call a corporatization of the social sector. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But this was bothering me because I agreed completely that the sector needed management, let's call it management, for having to do things, to be able to, work with people, etc., etc. But this corporate management, which was very successful in growing businesses to population scale. Today you have businesses, and every year the number of businesses that are greater than the number of nations is increasing. The reach of some of the organizations are 2 billion, 3 billion. The size of organizations are crossing $1 trillion. I mean, larger than most countries in this world. And this is a trend that's happening. But during this time, it was bothering me that you need management, but this corporate management is very dangerous if it is applied here. I mean, someday when we have a longer chat, I'll give you examples of the kind of things I would have done, which would have been very dangerous if I had not been guided by my social sector colleagues who had been working there for a long time. My initial work was in school leadership and management. And that's relevant because this is where one started realizing the relevance of leadership and management in any social work that needs to happen. I mean, those of you, and many of you do work in school, you will never ever find a good school with a bad head teacher. वो होता नहीं. Every good school, almost by definition, will have a good head teacher. And that simply statistically indicates to me that good leadership makes a huge difference in school quality, in learning levels, in the future of that school, etc., the involvement of the community, and so on and so forth. But then my thoughts started expanding from how can this leadership and management work beyond schools? All those organizations I was talking about, which were struggling to scale, struggling to achieve, sort of things that they needed to, carry out their work. It started sort of really taking shape. In fact, there was one point in time I was talking to S.C. Bihar Saab, who some of you in education will know is one of the greatest minds, worked in the space for about 60, 70 years now. And I was talking about there is this thing called the CMATs. CMATs are, State Institute of Management Training in all for education in all the states. And they're all defunct. And I remember talking to him about how these institutions can play a very big role in driving school leadership and education leadership and management. So somewhere in there lies the origins of some of the work that we were doing in ISDM. I see something's popping on the chat, but I'm not able to keep an eye on that. If there's something important, can somebody just call out and tell me, please? So moving on from there, I want to talk about one aspect which I feel is very, very critical for all of us in the sector. And this is my obsession with scale. Yeah, I am actually obsessed with scale. And this has become, I was very keen on scale. And since COVID, it's become an obsession. And what does scale mean, right? Scale, as all of you probably will appreciate, is not the scale of the organization, but it's a scale of impact, right? How much difference are we making to how many people in the population or in the planet, really? So it's about the impact. Is the problem reducing or not? Are the solutions working faster than the problem is mutating? It's like the vaccination. I talk about social sector as the vaccination for all social evils. So the virus will keep mutating. And if you don't solve the problem fast enough, the virus will keep mutating. We have what's called a wicked problem when we talk about social work. So we have to do solutions that are working faster than the problem. Then you're working at scale. When there are systemic reasons for the impact at scale and not just rapid band-aid. Rapidly applying band-aid is never going to solve the problem. You have to solve problems at the underlying areas. If education is bad, is there a reason? Is rote-based education one of the reasons for education to be bad? Is the involvement of families and rooting education in the lives of the children important for education? How do we make that happen? Otherwise, we'll keep doing 3 hours. We will improve maths learning and English learning and language learning, and we will never solve the problem. And scale, by the way, is not one organization's problem. It's every organization's problem. We are in it together. No one organization is ever going to be solved. Why organization? The social sector alone will not be able to solve problems. You will need Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar to work together. The civil society, the state, and markets if you have to solve problems. So scale is not one organization's problem. But having said that, every organization must be thinking scale. And scale has to be the mind of every individual social worker. And it basically means that we have to burn for every last person that is suffering the status quo you are fighting against. You may be working with only 1,000 children, but you should really feel for the 500 million or 250 million children in school who are suffering a problem that you're working on. That's when your mind is of scale, and thereby the models are models that you realize that if there is a collaboration, if there is partnerships, if there are fractals, if there are technology capabilities, it can work at scale. So one has to certainly think on those levels. And scale is clearly not just a numbers game. It is about mindsets and attitudes. It's about changing normatives. It's about changing prejudices. It's not just a numbers game. There's a lot of subjective aspects to scale, especially when we talk in the social sector. In my world of business, it was very objective. It was numbers, it was profits, it was revenues, it was shareholder value. Here it is there is a quantitative dimension, but there's also a lot of a qualitative dimension. And I was talking to Sreedhar once, and he gave me this word called scowling. How do you scale with a soul? Which is a very interesting word. But it's that. So there is a quantitative side and there is a qualitative side, which is very important when we work in the social sector. I do believe, and I mentioned about COVID and how COVID has made scale an obsession for me. COVID has to be the big pivot for our sector. In COVID, we know the kind of disasters that have happened, but even to pick one statistic, Azim Premji University's report said that 210 million people have slipped below poverty in the last 1 year. 210 million people. It's taken us decades to bring them out of poverty. Now we can't take another decade to bring them out of poverty. We have to do this like now. It's a disaster on our hands, and we have to think very differently. We have to find new ways. And I look at the world and I see that the Googles and the Amazons and the God knows who are creating businesses of huge scale using things like big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Today, Google, even as I'm presenting, is listening to me on my phone and will send me an ad, in another half an hour on what is relevant to me. And that's using big data at the background. Google Maps is about big data. How does one use this for social change? How does one use all this for bettering the public education system? How does one make this better for people suffering from COVID in the remote corners of this country? We have to figure out, how we are able to bring all these. So if we go back to work post-COVID as if nothing has happened and we continue doing the work we did, I think we would have done the biggest disservice to society. We have to figure out how are we going to change? How are we going to pivot? How are we going to leverage all these, what I call inventions of humankind, not just to tap for the businesses? How do we use big data, technological solutions, understanding motivation theories for people management, process management, production? We need to be changing completely. We need to think differently. And my view is we need to bring what I call soulful professionalism into the sector. We have to bring professionalism. We have to bring people who understand. Today, the number of people who work in sector without a deep understanding scares me sometimes. We don't have a right to do that. If you're a doctor, you should have studied how to do medicine. If you're an engineer, you should have studied engineering. It's only in our sector that people will walk in and say, I've never done anything in education, but I'm working in education. And I'm not saying you can't, but be very clear that you have a role to play. There is a technical role, there is a managerial role, there is a scientific role. And how do we bring this professionalization? It's very simple. And I use the three words of heart, hand, and head. The classic formula for an NGO is I see a problem, my heart burns. I figure out that, okay, this is what I want to do. I come up with some idea of what I want to do. And the next thing I do is I go and start an organization. We've completely missed the whole organization building side of it. And mind you, the organization is the vehicle that carries the work that you do. And if you don't know how to build organizations, you will never be able to scale the work that you have to do. Which is why, because you don't know how to run organizations, there are so many SPOs, social purpose organizations, that collapse, whereas the work itself was outstanding work. And all of us have seen this time and time again. So we have to build, we have to have the passion. I mean, I worked 25 years in banking. I had no passion for banking. And that can't happen in the social sector. You have to feel for it. You have to have an aspiration for a desired society that we all would love to be part of. So the heart is critical. You have to have the hand, which is you have to have the skills to be able to do the work that you want to do, whatever it is. You have to invest in yourself. You have to go and study. You have to go and learn. You have to understand when you work in school education, how does learning happen? What is development psychology about? What are the various theories of pedagogy that happen? What does child-friendly learning mean? We must invest in ourselves. And the third is the head aspect, which is how do we bring all this theory to play? How do we strategize? How do we analyze? How do we use data? How do we come up with innovations? How do we test them? How do we monitor them? There's a lot of theory that needs to come in. You know, it can't be just about bleeding hearts. And this is the most important thing when it comes to driving scale. And if we don't do this, we will continue to remain at the level at which we are. And it's not, I'm saying, you know, maybe I'm bitching about the social sector, but I can do this amongst ourselves. It's like, you know, I can crib about India, but a foreigner cannot crib about India because I'll defend India like there is no tomorrow. I'm talking in this sector and I'm being a little harsh without a doubt on the sector. But the fact of the matter is in 1947, when we got independence, we had 99% poverty. That was approximately 350 million people. But today, mind you, there are over 500 million people who are in poverty. So we can say that, you know, the numbers have come down to 30%, or if the government wants to say 22% or whatever it is. But the fact is there are more people in poverty today than there were at 1947 at independence. We very conveniently use percentages. So the problems are running away much faster than the solutions. I mean, how can we say today, after 70 years and so much economic progress, that every second child in this country is stunted or wasted? Clearly, we are not having impact at scale. And with the kind of economic progress, right? You've been running at whatever, 7, 8, 10% growth for the last, you know, so many years. So coming to my specific area and, you know, maybe 10, 15 minutes of this, I want to talk about development management and why I believe development management is so key to all these problems that I talked about. First of all, what is management? Management today is unfortunately confused with business management. Business management is one type of management. Management for business is business management. By the way, there is also management for the state. It is called as public administration. So if you want to go and become a manager in a business, you will go study an MBA. If you want to go become a manager or a bureaucrat, as you would call it, in the state, or you want to run, you know, large public administration, multilateral agencies, you would go and study what's called Masters in Public Administration. This history of management, and I will take business specifically because it has a lot more relevance to our context, has its origins in the Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution taught humankind how to produce goods in large quantities. Suddenly, I could produce things in large quantities. That's what the Industrial Revolution did. And management, by the way, was created by engineers at that time, because these engineers now wanted to figure out, oh my God, how do I manage all this, right? I have so much inventory. I need to manage my cash flows. I need to manage my distribution. I need to figure out how to sell. I need to figure out how to win customers from somebody else who might win it otherwise. How do I sustain long term? Where do I get the capital for making all this happen, etc., etc. That is where management got created. Management got created for an industrial problem. And it did a phenomenal job. And since Industrial Revolution, management has taken businesses, like I said in the earlier part of the talk, to become larger than nations. They're even becoming more powerful than nations. Today, businesses have a huge influence on the society. So don't underestimate the role that management has played in business. And of course, in the state, today, there are public administration theories on how to run the state, how to run large, cross-national programs, and so on and so forth. There is nothing like that in the social sector. There is some bits and pieces of work. I mean, IRMA is doing outstanding work in this country, but it's focused on a very specific thing. It's not building the whole ecosystem for development management. And does the management have to be different for the social sector? I don't need to explain it to you, right? Of course, it needs to be different because the fundamental purpose is different. The drivers are different. We talked about the objective and the subjective aspect. We talked about social purpose versus commercial purpose. We're talking about many other things, and I will come to that in just a second. But this management that we are talking about, which is development management, is a management or is a manager who understands firstly the complex nature of society, understand the complex nature of power structures that exist in society. All of you know who have worked on the field, the kind of complicated power structures that exist, right? Power structures that are historical, power structures that are religious based, power structures that are social and caste based, power structures that are socio-economic driven. There are so many power structures that we work in. No MBA program will teach you all this. And by the way, if you come and work in the social sector without knowing all this straight out of an MBA school, that's what I said earlier, you could do serious damage. So you need management professionals, firstly, who understand all that, and then has the ability to grapple with complex dynamic problems like poverty, like hunger. I mean, if I have to work on poverty, where do I go work? I mean, I remember in one of the talks, I talked about how the moment I say poverty to an MBA school person, what will that person go do? He will go do research with poor people, not realizing that the problem was not created by the poor people. This problem was created by the rich people or by the system. That understanding, right? How do you understand a system? Because when you work on public health, public education, hunger, poverty, women, gender, whatever it is, you have to think systems. Otherwise, we'll do what we call the band-aid solutions and be able to identify where to intervene. How do you design these interventions? What does human-centric design thinking mean? What does systems thinking mean in the social sector? We use system thinking even in the corporate world, but those are closed systems. When I work in a bank, I have a closed system. A Porter's framework is a very closed system. But when I work in the social sector, these are open systems. I have no control on what affects me. When I was working in education, I thought, my God, education is so complex. You need textbooks, you need examinations, you need teacher training, you need boards, you need state level, you need panchayat level involvement. It is so complex. What is that? School management committees, village education committees. And I'm thinking, this is so complex. And only to realize a year later or so that that was just the tip of the iceberg, because nutrition affects school education, gender affects school education, violence against women affects education, domestic violence affects, fertility rates affects, harvest seasons affect. I mean, the moment there's a harvest season, all the children are gone to work in the field. So these are complex spaces. How do I work on that? How do I identify leverage points? How do I design interventions? And then having done that, how do I now design organizations? Organizations that can take this work, which is from understanding society, the heart and the hand, to building organizations that can, understand people management, which is based on a lot of motivational theories and psychological research that's been done. How do we know what are innovative financial tools? How do we bring more money into the sector? One of the biggest things that changed the world of capital markets is the stock exchange. How do we create such things for the social sector where a lot of money flows into the sector? How do we manage partnerships and networks? How do we leverage technology and data, research, etc., right? Let me tell you some characteristics of development management that will make it very, very different from business management. And I'll just take 3 or 4 examples. The first one, for example, is this idea of collaboration. The day I graduated from IIM Ahmedabad, I was into competition. I got my increments because I got a larger market share. I won a client. I prevented my client to going a bit to somebody else. I got a larger share of wallet. I got a larger share of eyeballs, whatever it was about competition. In the social sector, the management has to be about collaboration. And the moment you recognize that, you completely change the outlook of leadership and management. What sort of reward structures, what sort of cultures do you create? What sort of financial incentives do you do? What sort of funders do you get? completely starts changing. Just this one basic thing, that you're moving from a competitive environment in the world of business to a collaborative environment in the social sector. And if you bring competition, which unfortunately is the truth, a lot of social sector organizations act like they're competing with each other. And what do? The child who is supposed to benefit from your work suffers because you just drain all the effort. If I go into education, the number of people working on the same problem is unreal instead of collaborating. The second one, for example, is about the idea of USP. In the world of business, I have a unique selling proposition. I can do something nobody else can do. Or I know how to make Apple products, which nobody else knows how to make. And then I can sell Apple for creating market cap of $1 trillion. In this sector, it can never be about a secret. It has to be about open architecture. How do I make the community understand and be able to solve all the problems? I should never be in a situation where only I have the solution and I keep perpetrating myself. I mean, all of you know this, right? But it completely differentiates your management style from the world of business to this world. The third one is this idea of participation. If you, and by the way, these are all also soft aspects of scale. Collaboration will drive scale. Inclusiveness will drive scale. The third one I was going to talk about was participation, right? If you want to drive really good social change, it can only happen by the fullest participation and the recognition of the agency of the communities that you work with. And the moment you think like that, you have to redefine your management style. Do you take decisions at the head office or do you take decisions at the field office? Completely changes when you think that participation is the basis of how management needs to be done. And if you are able to build participation and the involvement of the communities in the solution, and all of us know, they know their solutions far better than you will ever get to know, because you'll never understand what the problem is. You'll never know what it means to be a mother who's putting a child to bed, tying a towel around her stomach so that she doesn't feel hungry. Now, they are the people who know the problem. You need to facilitate, you need to open up vistas for them. You need to bring ideas to them that they can benefit from. So participation, for example, if you're able to do, you will drive significant scale. A human development approach, that's a whole UN framework that is there on what's a human development approach, which is building the capability, the opportunities, and how do we drive that, right? That's the fundamental level at which we need to solve problems. Otherwise, we'll solve it at the band-aiding level. This idea of emergence. In business, you can't live with emergence. You can't say, the world is going to change, in a year's time, in a decade's time. So I don't know what I can expect as a result. In the world of business, I have to keep giving what I call QSQT, quarter se quarter tak. In the social sector, it doesn't work that way. Aspirations change. Big events can change the course of things. Like I said, 210 million just went below poverty line. I have to reset all my calculations all over again. So it's a very, very different approach. And we can keep adding to these. I'm just giving you some indications of how these fundamental ideas have to start questioning how do you bring management into the social sector, which is why if you brought management without thinking through that scowling, as I said, Sreedhar mentioned to me, we could run into serious difficulty. And then it's a question of why is ISDM, and I'll quickly finish the time. It is not so much about ISDM as much as about all of us in the sector and how do we drive significant change in the work that we do so that we have impact at scale, so that many, many more people come out of poverty, come out of malnutrition, come out of abuse, come out of all sorts of social evils that we have. ISDM, our view is that, and this came out of studying a lot of history of institutions around the world in the country, that iconic institutions in higher education have the ability to inspire society and change the way the society works. And this is a very powerful statement I'm making. And we've seen that happen. And I'll give you a simple example of National Law School in India. When I was in my 12th standard, some of you may not know this, law was not meant for the bright people in the class. It was meant for the thugs in the class. Those who wanted to go into, thuggery or wanted to waste their life, or you really studied law not because you had any great intention of becoming a lawyer, because you just, didn't have a better thing to do in life. National Law School happened probably about 25 years ago now. But today, there are several national law schools. It's a 5-year integrated program with very fancy campuses. There's one lovely one in Bangalore. Law has become one of the top 3 professions for youngsters. Law has not changed in this country. There are still 3 crore cases pending in the courts of India. It still takes an average of 10 years for a case to be resolved in the courts of India. but it certainly become aspiration. It's amazing how higher education institutions can change the naksha of a country, can change the aspiration of a country. And it's very, very important to understand that. And the reason that happens is that higher education institutions are places people look up to, and it attracts the entire ecosystem. So it'll attract students, it'll attract researchers, it'll attract academics, it'll attract people who are working in the sector. In our case, it'll attract philanthropists, it'll attract multilateral agencies, iconic institution. But you have to build an iconic institution. It has to be world-class. It has to stand for good quality. And our view is that the same thing that I said about how our sector needs to come across as soulfully professional, we have to do that. So our view is that if we are building a campus for ISDM, it should look better than the best IIT or best IIM in this country. It doesn't need to be on large 200-acre plots. It can be on a 2-acre plot, but it needs to stand out and be very, very different in terms of what we can do. What we have learned, of course, in the time that we've been working, the power of DM is really, really humongous. And that recognition that, scale is very, very important. We need to do things very, very differently. That whole techno-managerial approach can be a disaster. Our belief in collaboration really, really works. There is this famous statement I grew up with, which said, competition breeds excellence. I think that's such a horrible statement because I'm now convinced, and I say that collaboration builds sustained excellence. And we need to also, figure out how development management also influences how businesses are managed and how it eventually state is managed and so on and so forth. And the last thing is that development management needs to be built not in the Western hemisphere. It needs to be built in a country like India, in a developing country, which has the complex, challenges that exist, the complex laboratory, as I call it. It has the intellectual capital to be able to do these sort of work. And that's the kind of space that we want to work in. What will we do in the next 5 years? And I will take another 5 minutes for that. We firstly want to move from an idea to an institution. We worked for 5 years. We believe the idea is very powerful. We have students who've gone and worked out there. Many of you have come back and told us about this makes sense. We have philanthropists who are willing to support us, institutions and academics across the world who are saying, this is really, really powerful stuff. Let's do it. So we want to move from there. So we want to make investments. We want to build hard and soft infrastructure. Soft infrastructure because we want to build knowledge. We want to write case studies. We want to write books. We want to write papers. We want to have a journal of development management. We want to build the hard infrastructure. We want to put technology. We want to leverage technology for the work we do. We don't have the luxury of 100 years to build the management for the social sector. We need to do it in the next 10 years. How do we use machine learning, artificial intelligence, knowledge graphs, and so on and so forth. And we believe the fastest way to do it is by building networks and collaboration. And I mean, not just national, but global networks and collaborations. We focus on 3 areas of work. PGP is the postgraduate program, where we are hoping to build partnerships and accreditation. There's a longitudinal study happening to figure out how is our PGP working? Is it working? If not, what should be changed? And we're constantly making changes and tweaks to our program. The second big piece of work, which is very relevant for all of us in this group, is what we call strategic capacity building, which is how do we work with organizations in the sector? We don't want to be this ivory tower that has lost touch with the ground. So all our work is based on the work we do on the ground. So we are thinking of, can we develop, exec ed programs, make it available in synchronous, asynchronous, offline, online. We want to build some nation building programs for women leaders, for young entrepreneurs, for segments that have a disproportionate influence on society. We want to build an excellence framework. Excellence is a word you will not hear in the social sector, sadly. It's very associated with techno-managerial ideas. And I agree with that. Excellence was associated with efficiency parameters. But we need to figure out what does excellence mean for us. And if that's excellence, and for me, excellence is about what will drive scale. So we want to figure out how do we develop an excellence framework and make it available to everybody to figure out, to understand where am I, what can I do to get better at what I'm doing, and so on and so forth. And the biggest piece of work we're doing is what we're setting up a global knowledge hub. This global knowledge hub, and this is where we are different from an IRMA or any school of even not-for-profit management in the world, because really we need to work on the ecosystem. We need to work on the foundational core knowledge. So we are trying to figure out how do we set up centers of excellence, for example. And these centers of excellence will work on doing research on different management strands. So from people management to financial management, and we're doing some very interesting centers also. So for example, one of the first centers we've got funded is a center for philanthropy for social justice. The next two centers we're hoping to set up is a center of excellence for data sciences and artificial intelligence for social impact. A third one we are hoping to set up in April is a center of excellence for social finance. How do we think of finance innovatively? What will bring more money? How does risk capital get unlocked for the social sector? How does, and money usually follows impact. So what does impact mean? What does a 5% improvement in gender equality mean for an impact investor? And unless we define all that, we can take very simplistic models, which can be very, very dangerous in social work. Like I said, the dangers of corporatizing social sector is very, very dangerous. One of the interesting ideas we work on, and some of you may not realize we're actually working on behalf of some of you, is we're trying to see if we can build a college collective. Because in the idea of collaboration, there are a lot of others who want a campus, and Indian School of Democracy may want a campus, another school of public health may want a campus, another school on gender studies. So we said, if we are going to build a campus, can we build a campus where all of you can be housed together? Because that will bring a lot more richness in the learning journey of the student. That will bring a lot more richness in the thinking and mindsets of people who go on to work in the social sector. Imagine an incubation center which brings people from different types of work together, from development management, from social work, from working in a technical area like microfinance together to set up social enterprises. So we want to figure out how do we do that. And most importantly, what I'm very proud of is in many ways, Sharad Agarwal, Suparna, Gaurav Shah, myself, who started ISDM, really didn't have any right to start and say that we're going to build a world-class institution. But I do believe that we're pushing this country towards democratizing higher education in this country. How do people like you and I build these great institutions? That in the original days, it used to be the government. Then it used to be the business houses, the large business houses, the Jindal, the Nadar, the Azim Premji. Then it reached lots of collective of rich people. So the Ashoka universities, the Kriya university. I think we have taken it to another level altogether, where the common man can aspire to build institutions and driven by the aspirations of common people. So we are hoping to really make a huge difference in the space of higher education itself. Higher education has to play a role in making society a better place. It can't be a place which creates jobs for people, because that's really wrong in many ways. I'm going to stop there, but before I finish, and this is really about people in this group, right, the UIA portfolio, I'm very keen to explore how do we collaborate, because I believe there's so much richness in this group. And I know in the WhatsApp group, we had this exchange about youth. I do believe, certainly compared to my age, there are a lot of much younger people. And I believe the future of social work should be in the hands of people who are in their 20s, 30s, and maybe in their 40s. 50s, 60s and all, we need to move on, but maybe pass on the experiential, social capital, intellectual capital that we may have gained onto, another generation altogether. How do we collaborate? Are there people who want to come and teach? Are there work that you've done which students can learn from? Can we write case studies about work that you've done? Would you want to hire students from ISDM? Because placements is a very big thing for us. And we believe they will bring a very different combination of heart, head, and hand that I talked about earlier. And I know, for example, Slam Out Loud has one of our alums, and Gaurav was telling me she's like, one of their best employees or whatever. And I'm also thinking about capacity building programs. Is there some way we can, cover the cost and carry out programs that might be relevant for this entire group? All of you want to understand systems thinking. We can create a systems thinking workshop as long as our costs get covered. We are a not-for-profit in any case. Whatever else, in the spirit of collaboration, I'm always seeking ideas, involvement of people. The more people get involved, the richer the ideas get, and the more powerful the institution will get. Sorry if I took too long, but I'm going to stop there and listen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ravi. I think that was the last 45 minutes packed of insights, new learning, and of course, like the wisdom that you carry. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. I think for me, there have been like multiple takeaways in the past. While you were speaking, I think one statement that has stayed with me is, what does it feel like to go to a school 1,000 times rather than saying we are going to 1,000 schools? Or introducing us to new management theories with the lens of the development sector, something that we completely miss out. Um, it pushed me to think about where exactly our decision making happens. Does it happen in the core office? Does it happen in the field office? If yes, which kind of decisions happen there? And lastly, how do we facilitate the transfer of power, not only within the team, but also to the last mile beneficiary that we work with? So thank you so much for that. I see we have also been joined by your amazing colleagues, Gaurav and Sharad, who are here. And I know at some point of time, people have definitely spoken with one of the three of you. They need no introduction. Both of them come from, Gaurav comes from BITS and Sharad has come from IAM, worked across spaces in Azim Premji Foundation, PNG, automotive industries, bring the wealth of management experience that you talk about, but also like wisdom that can be that is malleable and relevant to the social sector space. Thank you so much for joining us, Gaurav. And Sharad. I hope the next questions the set of questions that come in, feel free to chime in, add your perspective. Before the talk, Ravi, we collected a bunch of questions from people that would be relevant to this talk, and I'm going to be throwing them your way. But I'm intrigued by starting off with something that we talked about a lot. You talked about the corporatization of the social sector, but you also talked about like the professionalization. And for people who are pretty young, starting an organization, I would place myself in that category. There seems to be like a merging boundary. I don't seem to be able to draw a difference where we are saying, are we trying to professionalize the sector? Or are we trying to corporatize? So I would want to hear a little bit more about how do we differentiate, let's say, as a founders or as team members, as to what's the difference when we say we are professionalizing what we do, but we are not per se corporatizing it. And feel free to add a couple of examples. And then the follow-up question to this would be like, what have been some of the successes and challenges? I know you talked a lot about successes already and what your next 5 years entail, but what are some of the hardest challenges that perhaps you cracked, perhaps you failed in, perhaps you're still battling with, that you would want us to know about? So my question is twofold, and then we'll take more from Manvi's side. Feel free to others who have dropped the questions in the chat box, feel free to keep adding, and we'll take them towards the last 15-20 minutes. Yeah, over to you, Ravi.
Yeah, let's start by talking about how capitalism and industrial revolution has dominated our lives. It's actually completely defined our lives. Industrial revolution, and to be honest, it has created economic wealth for humankind like we've never seen in the history of humankind. There's no doubt about that also. But the fact is, it's created a very unequal world also, right? That's what all of us clearly understand working this way. Unfortunately, even words have got hijacked. So when you as a sector are defined, what are you called? You're called not-for-profit. You're defined in the context of a for-profit organization. There isn't even a word for you. Or at best, you will be called a non-government organization, which means if you're not government, you don't have an identity. And professionalism are words that have got hijacked in the business world. In fact, when we started by saying management, people said, why are you calling it management? Management is the cause of all the problems in our world. Why are you calling it management? Not realize that management is not their, whatever, their property or their right. I can have management for the social sector. And that management doesn't have to be anything like it is in the business world. So there is a hijacking of these terminologies, and thereby, unfortunately, when we say professional, it's a very techno-managerial notion that you come up with. But I want and I hope we will redefine professionalism to be humane. Why can't professionalism be humane, respectful, treat people with dignity, believe in fairness? None of this exists in professionalism. I believe that idea of professionalism is even more powerful as an idea for professionalism than the current idea of professionalism, which is very techno-managerial in its nature, which is very different, driven by efficiency paradigms, by efficiency paradigms, standardization paradigms. That's what defines professionalism. We need to bring humanity into it. We need to bring all those universal human values that I talked about. So for me, professionalism is that. And that's very different from the corporatization. Corporatization is in fact, and in this group, I can take that liberty of saying it, is the most dangerous thing you can do to the social sector, because the corporate management is based for an industrial revolution, is based for production, is based on capitalism, none of which have proven successful for the bottom of the pyramid. And I hate to even say bottom of the pyramid, but that's a word that's, society has created, unfortunately. And that's what I mean by corporatization. So the success of industrial revolution was in this idea that standardization, if you standardize, then you can do it in large quantity. I've had very senior people come in the corporate world and work with me, even in my Azim Premji days. They say, 250 million children, we have to standardize, and we have to just replicate after that. And I used to sometimes explain to them, mere ghar mein do bacche hain, I can't standardize the education for these two kids. One wants to put the music very loud, one wants to sit in silence. One wants to watch videos and learn, one wants to read and learn. One wants to take tuition and learn, one hates tuition. What do you mean standardization? Human beings cannot be standardized unless you all want to become robots in our life. So this corporatization is very dangerous, because you take the approach of standardization. You'll take approaches of efficiency paradigm, which is input output. For this input, did I get so much output? And if I don't get that output, which is measurable, then I have a problem. It is driven by capitalistic ideas, which is shareholder value, versus what we now say in our sector, stakeholder value. Because the labor is equally a stakeholder, the customer is equally a stakeholder. In our case, the partners, the people that we work with, organizations that we work with, everybody is a stakeholder. If we take a shareholder approach, which is a very narrow view of what we do, that's corporatization. So all the wrong things of standardization, of a techno-managerial approach, of capitalism, of treating human beings as resources, as widgets, are all very corporatization of the social. And we have to reject it. And we have to make people realize professionalism is not that. Professionalism is when I am a good human being. I know I get a little emotional about that, but I hope that made some sense.
I can sense the passion coming through, but I think that's very much needed. Thank you so much for bringing it alive. I'll pass it on to the second part of the question, which was like, what have been some of the successes and challenges?
No, the thing is that it's about emergence. We are now getting into an area where I don't know what are the answers. While I'm telling you that I need this professionalization, I have not got a paper written out on everything that is required. I have to build it through collaboration. I want to listen to everybody, and and I'm always listening to people to figure out how do we build this shared idea, because it's only when it's a shared idea that will be a successful idea. That's when it will be a societal idea. So that journey is the journey that we are on, right? How do we bring more and more people to be involved, and from all diverse sort of backgrounds and groups. One of my biggest challenges has still been this idea of corporatization, because, and I say this with a little bit of indiscretion, when somebody is supporting us and they think, "Arey, ye to mera type ka MBA hai. So I will expect this guy to bring in these ideas of efficiencies and standardization and performance management and reward structures and all that." And then I turn out to be this very different sort of a person. So that's been a clash sometimes, because when did you start talking like this? You become a Jhola wala. I don't want to become a Jhola wala. I don't want to become this techno manager. I want a beautiful integration of those two. So it's a new idea. And when you're talking about new ideas, it's a very slow burner. It takes time to get people along. That would be my second one. The third is just trying to get the community to understand. And I'll talk about students, for example. I find it very easy to convince students about why they should study development management. Try convincing their parents why they should send them to study development management. Oh my God. Right? Because there are lots of mindsets. Yaar, tum degree nahi dete ho. Yaar, degree se kya farak pada hai? How many people are there outside with degrees who don't have anything to go with their degrees? In fact, recently in Bihar, there was a peon's post that was up. And there were 3,000 PhDs who applied for that post. Tumhare degree se hota kya hai? That idea that degree nahi hai to kahan ja rahe ho type such. Second, your social sector, everybody thinks is only about volunteering. Yahan pe to koi career nahi hota hai. Yahan pe blood donation hota hai. Yahan pe, wall paint karte hain. We read some books for blind children. That idea that it is a career. So some of those mindsets that exist are the challenges that we've been having to work with. But otherwise, I'll be honest, Gaurav, that it is amazing how the world has been conspiring to make things happen for us. And a lot of you in the social sector will realize that when you work with passion, it is amazing how things fall into place. कहीं ना कहीं से एक श्रीधर आ जाएगा and will take us to another level altogether. No, I'm very serious about this, right? UI just happened. Did you plan for UI when you started your organization? No, you did. It's amazing how things happen as you go along in your journey, as long as you're passionate and committed. In fact, if you come to ISDM, there is this, lovely wall. The biggest banner that you'll see is a famous Margaret Mead statement. And she's a very famous sociologist who said that never doubt what a small group of passionate, committed citizens can do to change the world. Indeed, if the world has changed, it's only because of them. So I am completely a believer कि boss हम दिल से काम करेंगे. It's amazing how people will come and support you. So I must say there's been a lot of positives. I would say there are more positives in our journey than I'd say challenges.
Hey Gaurav, can I ask a question?
Yes, Ujwal ji, we have been waiting to hear from you.
I can't see your face, Ujwal.
Hey, Ravi,
That
was an excellent presentation, Ravi. Very impressed. Question for you. You talked very eloquently about scale and super scale in your this thing. What do you see as the role of the small NGO?
Of knowledge, did you say, Ujwal?
Of small NGOs. I mean,
small NGOs, yeah.
Yeah.
No, this is a very important question because, sometimes people confuse my statement as everybody has to become big. No. That would be a disaster because you have to have somebody who works with 5, rape victims who have been, sort of brought back and their life is being rebuilt and all that. So we have to think fractals. You need people working in all aspects of a work. Somebody needs to work at the macroeconomic level and somebody needs to work at the grassroots level. But the mindset is of scale. So even if I'm the smallest organization, I have to burn. So I'll give you an example, right? So I work with this organization called Impact. Impact works with out of school girl children. And there are a bunch of 15 MBAs who are running that program. Amazing program. They're thrilled and they go back home and sleep every night being very happy that 50,000 girls are being taken care of. And I keep telling them, you cannot go to sleep if you're in social sector, not worrying about the fact that there are 5 million girls who are not going to school. So that idea is for me at the root of scale. So even if I'm a small NGO working in a small village on a local issue, I must recognize that I have to fit into the larger schema of things. So I don't have to necessarily grow everything. So, things like how do I institutionalize the work that I do and make it available far and wide? So you're working with, watershed in a village in, Madikere. Now, how do I document that? For me, that's how I will build scale. I document that, I make it available, I share it, I go and talk about it. So that idea that this has to spread to far larger numbers is a very, very critical piece. And that does not require your organization to scale. Some organizations have to scale. My own views, in fact, if organizations scale, if any, we'll have a problem. Because then those organizations have to continue to exist because a lot of jobs are dependent on that, etc. So I would not recommend for organizations to scale, but I would talk about how do we make sure our impact is constantly spreading. Is that making sense, Ujwal?
I think he's logged off, Ravi.
No, so that's my view on this whole idea. Yeah.
But talking on his behalf, yes, definitely made lots of sense.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Ujwal.
Yeah. So I asked that question specifically because even here in the community that you're addressing just now, there is this, I see a divide between the small and the big. And I see positions being taken of, the big guys are bad or the small guys are the best thing that happened to the world. How do you break that? So somewhere in the narrative that you're building, what is the solution for this, not creating this small versus big dichotomy or confrontation, which seems to be happening? I see more and more of it, and it worries me no end.
No, Ujwal, you're so right. And this is just one, right? I also think this distrust of the markets, for example.
Yeah.
I think that's also a very dangerous thing, the distrust of the state. I think this trust deficit that is happening, right? Between the funder and the fundee, between the small organization and the big organization, the organization that is working upstream and the organization that is working downstream. There's a lot of these things. And I think until we recognize that all of us have to play a role to scale. And I said it earlier in my talk, that scale is not the problem of one organization. The scale is the problem of every organization. And that's a different mindset. And that trust has to be there. We will never achieve scale unless there are bigger organizations, unless there are funding organizations, unless the market is involved, unless there are downstream organizations. And any value judgment, कि तुम तो छोटे काम कर रहे हो, तुम बड़े काम कर रहे हो, that is the biggest nonsense we can get into.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for that.
Thank you so much, Ravi sir, for that perspective. And I think it's very important for us, all of us as co-founders also, to realize that and work towards that. But I'll be shifting our gears little. You talked about how important it is to have passionate people in our sector who understand and where they come from and what brings them there. So there was a lot of questions regarding the recruitment. And one of which is, what are some lessons on recruiting that you would like to share for development sector, like the top skills that we should look for specifically when we are looking for the core leadership team members? And the second to that is, how easy has it been for organization like ISDM to attract youth who are actually passionate and not doing this just for the sake of doing or just for the sake of higher education?
Yeah. No, and this is a very, very important question, Manvi, that you asked. And I think these are management questions that one is trying to answer, right? What does talent management mean? What do you look for in talent? In fact, as we speak, and hopefully in another 6-7 months it will be available, there's a 2-year survey we are doing on understanding talent management. What is it that motivates, retains, and excites talent to work in the social sector? But just to coming to your question of what do you look for when you hire, I mean, without a doubt, you need the passion. I mean, I really don't think you can work in this space. And by passion, are you a good human being, right? Do you talk a language of fairness, of justice, of dignity, of equality, of a sustainable world? And that's the starting point for me, right? And that then can translate into work on gender, work on education, work on public health work. Sometimes we are worried. I find that people say, "Nahi, tumko public health mein kuch aata nahi." I think the starting point is of the person that you're bringing in. Does this person have a wider perspective, which is this idea of a collective good versus individual good? Am I that sort of a person? Is a starting point for me, at least, because unfortunately, while all of us are born with those universal human values, we get conditioned over time. So when we are 20 and 25, we're very, very different human beings. So I'm not putting down anybody. It's just that those are our experiences. So is that the language I talk? Is the first thing that I would talk about. The second is this idea of working in an emergent manner, which is, not everything is going to be very, very definitive and predictive and, rewardable and all that sort of thing. Because I feel people lose their ability to work once you're in that. And I find this especially for crossovers, because when you cross over from the world of business, everything was very definite. I knew exactly why I will get an incentive and how much increment I would get and how much bonus I would get based on some formula. And then suddenly I'm in space, there's no clarity of thought and all. A little bit of that emergence is very important to be able to live with. The second, I would put that in the first one itself as the kind of person that you are. The second, as an organization, you have to be very clear what are the skill sets that you need to carry out your intervention and build the organization in the ecosystem that you're working in. If you need to work with the government, you need to have people who understand how to work with the government. If you need people who speak tribal languages, you need to find people who can speak tribal languages so that they can work with them. If you need finance experts to carry out your work because you're in that space, you have to have clarity of the cognitive skills that are required. This is one area where we really don't have any idea of how to get about it. We take kuch experience hai to le lete. You have worked in banking, oh, you must be good in finance. No, it doesn't mean that at all. You have to have your own ability to assess, is this person? And if you don't, get somebody to do it for you. And that's the other thing that we don't do. We don't involve collaboration in our hiring process. Can I call somebody from another organization to sit in my interview? How many of us do that? None. But I believe those are smart ways of, figuring out, because I'm not capable of, I can't assess everything that I want. I'm looking for a technology person, let's say, in our organization. I'm not an expert. So let me find somebody who can tell me that, boss, this is what this person brings and talks a language that I. So this cognitive, the third, and this is the most important one, in my opinion, in the sector, is the learnability quotient. Does this person, and it doesn't matter, it's not an age thing. Even at 55, I will find people who have very high learnability quotient, and I will find people at 25 who have lost the learnability quotient. And this is very important because that learnability is very important because this is a sector which is going to constantly be changing and evolving. And if you don't have the ability to constantly learn and adapt and change your biases, prejudice, understanding, etc., you have a problem. So, right human being, cognitive skills, very high learnability.
A lot of the organizations, even in this forum, are capacity building programs for developing musicians, building political leadership, training school leaders. So what can we learn from ISDM experience to formalize our training verticals? Because a lot of us are doing kind of similar work with different stakeholders. So what can be some top 2-3 things that we can learn from ISD to build on our training vertical?
Yeah, 2-3 things. One is I want to come to the fact that most of the capacity building work we're doing is in the adult learning space, right? As different from schools where I'm working in the children's learning space. So andragogy versus pedagogy is clearly what we are working on. So the first thing is to understand how adults learn. I find a lot of programs, even institutions, teach management at 25-year-olds like they're teaching a 6th standard student. You know, and it's like trying to drive and fill an empty bucket with knowledge. Andragogy, the learning has to be the ownership of the individual. It is not, you know, in fact, we tell our students that the learning contract is yours. What you want to learn, you decide. How you want to learn, you decide. How much you want to learn, you decide. In a school, I don't do that. In a school, I decide. And of course, that is another problem because that's a very industrial idea. The 5th standard, mein ye sab ho jana chahiye. That's a different problem, and I won't talk about that. But the first thing is that ownership of the learning has to be in the person's hand. That's the first thing that I feel. The second is this idea that you teach them not to learn something, but learn to learn. You know, that idea of building the systemic ability to learn. Rather than teaching you 3 things, I will teach you how you go about the learning process when I'm teaching you those 3 things. Because you can't teach everything there is to learn. You will have to go out and learn a lot more. And in an emergent world, the world is going to continuously be changing. So how do I teach you not, like I said, learning to learn is a very important part of this thing. And the third one is this idea of collaborative learning. I find the best learning happens when peer learning happens, rather than the, sort of teacher-student relationship. You know, the adult-adult relationship and the learning process of that peer group, that's a very important thing. And the last one, which for me is very important and as a pedagogic idea, is if we want to build a world of collaboration, create even the learning process to be a process of collaboration. So when we use collaborative, we call it, CBCL, which is context-based collaborative learning. The reason is that I want to build a collaborative individual. I want him to or her to recognize that it's in collaboration that you will learn a lot more than if you try to do this all yourself. So how do you build a collaborative process in that learning thing? And the last one is this idea of I will teach one person, but I hope that one person goes on to teach another 5 people. And that idea of, creating a viral effect is an important. These are some thoughts coming immediately to my mind.
Great. Those are some amazing thoughts. And I think that's also one way that we can look at scale on how we train one person in that. Yes, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Those are some great insights for probably all of us who are working with adults in the training verticals. I would like to open it for everyone. I see a couple of questions in the chat box, but if you would like to unmute yourself and ask them directly.
I think Gitesh and Ruchi have already dropped the question.
Yeah.
Gitesh, would you want to share?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Manvi. Thank you so much, Ravi sir, for enlightening us all with your wisdom and all the knowledge which you have gained. Being in the social impact space, I wanted your viewpoint on how basically you view the future of social impact organizations, but functioning as a for-profit. Do you see that for-profit social enterprises, a keen focus on both competition and collaboration needs to exist, or just competition or just collaboration? So I find that like a little bit of a gray area. If you could just throw some light on that.
No, Gitesh, you've given a very interesting question. You've given me an opportunity to make a point that I wanted to make also. that, so at ISDM, we have created this term SPO, social purpose organization, rather than for profit, not for profit, for government, not for government, etc. Because your primary purpose is a better world, whatever that is, right? In terms of people, humanity, planet, sustainability, climate, whatever it is. So social purpose organ, it doesn't matter whether it's for profit or if it's for not. That's the first thing I want to make. The second point I want to make is, given the current capitalistic structure of society, some problems are solved better in a for-profit mode than in a not-for-profit mode. There's absolutely no doubt about that. The third point I want to make is, whatever your model is, it has to be sustainable. Because if you want to solve problems, then you have to figure out how do you continue solving, at least till the problem exists. And then you will evolve into, higher order problems or whatever it is. So sustainability has to be integral to the work you do, because otherwise it's injustice. I can't run a PGP program and not have built sustainability that at some point I say, "Arey, is saal mere paas paise nahi." I can't run a program. So I think that for-profit, not-for-profit is not so much about for-profit or not-for-profit. It's about social impact. It's about sustainability of your, work that you're doing, and not of the organization, of the work that you do. These are critical points I want to make. The third point I want to make is on this idea of profit. In my first year, and now I'm talking about 1986, there was a Professor Labdi Bhandari, one of the most amazing professors that has ever lived on, at least gone to the IIM. He said that you can't be in the business of making money. In my first class, he said you have to be in the business of solving a problem of humankind. It could be a rich person's problem, that doesn't matter. But you're there, you must recognize that you're not in the business of making money. What capitalism unfortunately has done, and that happened somewhere, in the late 90s, it's created the shareholder value maximization as the mantra for businesses, which means how do I maximize the money and the gain that I have? If you're clear that your mantra is a certain desired impact on society, money is a byproduct of that, then you're absolutely in the right space. And by that definition, and that's why I said earlier that development management needs to influence business management to understand that even business management has to be in social purpose. You can't be in business for any other reason other than a better society and a better world, because you will not last long. So completely agree with you. And this question of competition versus collaboration, clearly it's the spectrum. You can't be at either end. You can't be, because you will compete for some, things, whether it could be space, it could be people, it could be funding. So, but it doesn't need to be in a killing competition sense. In my market share world, I gain market share at somebody else's loss. And I talked about how we can hire collaboratively. I think you can fundraise collaboratively. And by the way, the funders are collaborating now. So today, funders are coming together and say, let's pool all our money and then put it into one NGO. How about 10 NGOs came together and went to a funder and said, you give us our money, we will share it among ourselves because we are doing different aspects of this work. So you have to think collaboration, but obviously an extreme is not what I would recommend, but more towards collaboration and less towards competition is clearly my view of the future. And that's only because the system exists like that. The capitalistic system works on the notion of scarce resources. So competition almost by definition comes into play. But if we change the world to, more, let's say, socialistic dimensions, and I'm not propagating one or the other, then it would be very different in terms of how we would approach it.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much. That answers my question.
I have a question.
Yes, Leena.
Hi, Ravi. Amazing. Thanks so much for this discussion. I mean, I'm two things here which I've done, which is not something which I'm over 50 and I came in with pure passion, but I reached my 5-year mark. And I think I'm in a good space because now finally I'm in Ujwal's cohort. So I'm doing some things right? So something's good here. And I'm really thankful for this amazing safe space for us to ask the most silliest questions, because we're coming from a place of little ignorance. So talking about hiring, you said empathy and passion and emotion is really important, which is there. What happens? Well, I kind of have my limitations in chalking deliverables and performance, because we are coming from the place of optimism also, like you said, ye kar raha hai to uske paas ye skill set hogi. We do have a come of optimism in our thing when we start hiring, hoping for the best. But organization, like I particularly struggle with performances, mapping and deliverables, and would love if you have any format, anything which you are developing for people like us, would be great help.
No, Leena, firstly,
Ravi
since
ji,
you've... Yes, sorry,
before
go
you
ahead.
answer, could we couple it with Ruchi's question, who also posted something on the chat, so that you get to answer both of them together? Ruchi?
Yeah, hi, Ravi. I'm from Humankind, and we actually are building compassion capital by giving voice and agency to every school-going child. So my question, just because we are going to turn 2 this month, just wanted to ask in terms of like with scale, definitely a lot of light you've thrown, but I wanted to understand scale in relation to speed and collaboration with the lens of ethics. If you can throw some light on that. Thank you.
And this is a question very close to my heart, because performance management is inherently a hierarchical process. Somebody is judging somebody else. And, and you're judging me because you have the money to start this organization. And I am it's a classic labor capital wala type question. And it's very close to my heart. I don't have an answer to your question, but I will share a conversation I had recently with a really fantastic mind, Professor Kenvin Smith from UPenn, and I asked him this question. I claim that I'm a non-hierarchical organization, but I want to have performance management for all the good reasons that you said, right? We want the money to work in its best way for the people that we want it to work for and all that. So he came up with this point about, and I'll make another point in a minute, about how you need to move from a transactional relationship with your team members to a relationship with your team members. And the moment it becomes a relationship-based, sort of working space, that performance no longer will be hierarchical. That's like, brother and sister having a chat, right? Okay. I will give you very critical feedback, because with a brother and sister, especially, there is no, at least in the younger ages, there is no ego or fear. And I know that you're saying it for my interest and so on and so forth. So I think, how do you build an organization that has a strong relationship culture versus a transaction culture? That's an important thing in the performance management, because once that happens, then the performance management is very, very powerful, because that's in a safe space. Then I'm no longer defending myself and you're pointing something out, and we can carry on having a very meaningful discussion. So that's my limited view, but this is an area we are researching on, and this talent management work that we're doing hopefully will give you some frameworks for that.
So I have another point there. So for me,
yes.
I'm so optimistic. I keep thinking, it takes me literally sometimes 3 or 4 months to realize that I think something has to be reviewed. Like you are very optimistic, you have that kind of relationship, but yet then some things don't happen which are supposed to happen. So that's when, my struggle is that. So I just want to leave that with you.
No, on that, I'll say a horrible thing. There is a point in time where you have to be honest about these conversations. If it's not working out, it's not working out.
Right.
I think that's also an important part of that and I'm not in any way passing judgment on the person.
Right.
It's the square hole, round, peg type thing is also possible, right? We may get some of our decisions wrong. Sure. But I think the conversation has to be very, very much equal. It's not, I'll tell you 3 reasons why I need to sack you tomorrow. I think it's a far more equal conversation. But yeah, you need to call a spade at some point in time is also very important, because the risk you run, Leena, and ISDM has gone through it, and I can say that, is you can easily become a very laissez-faire organization, which is very happy in the activities are doing. And I find that there are a lot of NGOs which are caught in what I call the activity trap. They're very happy. Everybody goes to work saying, I'm doing great work and all that, but nothing is happening outside. It is having no impact at all. It's very easy to fall in that trap. And we should be very, very careful of that. So you must build a very respectful, people are treated with dignity and fairness, but also very high on accountability. In my opinion, our sector should have multiple times accountability than any corporate would have. So that's a very important part of it. And I think those are important to build into the conversations. And Ruchi, your question, right? And that's the holy grail. How do you build scale, speed, and quality? That's what they talk about in the corporate world. In our case, you brought the question of ethics in collaboration, for example, right? And I think how do you build speed, scale, and ethics, when you're talking about collaboration, becomes very, very key. And that's why I believe we need to build these frameworks. Unfortunately, there isn't a management framework that tells me, at least I don't know, in the social sector, how do you build speed, scale, and ethical mindsets at the same time? Or do we take shortcuts in building scale? or are there acceptable shortcuts? I really don't have an answer to that question, but I think that is where, see, even in business management, we say management is partly a science and partly an art. Management in the social sector right now is purely an art. There isn't almost any science that's happened, and that's why ISDM is there and trying to build that science and all that. So it's a little bit of an art, but you can't compromise on any of those three. You cannot compromise on speed, because we have to achieve, like I said, if 230 million people have gone in below the poverty line, I don't have the luxury of 30 years to do that, because they will all their lives sort of come back. So speed is very important. Scale, I have to do 230 million. I can't be happy doing just 20,000 or something like that. So it is critical, and I have to do it ethically. I have to do it in a manner in which I respect society, I respect the planet, I respect downstream things that might happen. So that we have to do it. I have no doubt. Do I have a framework or answer? I don't have an answer, is my honest view, Ruchi. But these are the kind of things that we should collaboratively build and discuss and share thoughts that we've done and so on and so forth. So I mean, anybody else might have an answer to your question. Sorry, I couldn't give you a perfect answer, Ruchi.
No, thank you so much. We'll all sail together.
Right. One of the things I tell our students when they go out is, I don't have all the answers. I'm giving you some indications, but I will now learn from you. And I think that's an important thing, just to learn from everybody. And that richness of, these networks, these collaborations that we are building are very, very powerful.
Hi, Ravi. This is Suresh from Miracle Feet. We identify and treat children born with clubfoot, a congenital defect. My question to you was, the corporatization that you talk of is just reinforced by CSR funding. A number of these guys are, look at the business principles. They say look at short-term objectives, not necessarily the fact that you need to build a program. Do you think ISDM being, as part of the ecosystem, how do we address this, either ISDM directly or in collaboration with, say, stakeholders in UIA and so on?
Yeah. No, I think this is a challenge that a lot of people are going through, right? Either it is CSR funding, or it is funding from foundations where money was made in the corporate world, and thereby there is a certain mindset of how things are approached. And it's a conversation to be had. And I want to bring up something Sreedharan and I were talking about. All of us in the social sector are desperate for money. And in our desperation, we will take almost any money. We won't take all money. And when I say that, I don't mean from cigarette companies and from arms dealers and all that. I'm talking about people are giving you wrong messages. I am hearing clearly that this person doesn't understand what I'm talking about. I am hearing clearly that this person does not believe in what I'm talking about. But if he's willing to give a check, I will take his check. The starting problem is there. That's the first thing. So I think we need an adult relationship with our funders. That's the most important thing. If the moment you go with a child-parent relationship with funders, you're going to start falling into a trap. So please treat a funder as your equal. That's the first point I want to make. And I say equal, and I don't mean, sometimes we treat them as useless people. Give me your money, you have no idea. That's also very wrong. I think we should treat them as equal. That's the first thing. Both being too superior or too inferior, that's the first thing. The second thing I want to talk about, and this is something that the corporate world does not understand, is that, these are frameworks that exist. This is not even ISDM has created, right? This idea of work happens from inputs to outputs to outcomes to impact. I can discuss inputs and outputs on a quarterly basis with you. I will hire 2 people. I will design 2 programs. I will vaccinate 5,000 children. I will go to 20 villages. I will, interact with 100 schools. Input variables I can. Output variables, so many things will happen out of that. So many products will get created. So many children will come out and graduate. So many will be I can do that also. It's when you get into outcomes and impact that you have to recognize these are longer term things and probably even beyond. And when you take that spectrum from inputs to outputs to outcome to impact, you will realize you have lesser influence on impact. If anybody tells me that, the world became a better place because of that NGO's work, you're kidding. Because you cannot. It is going to be a larger schema of things, many others working, a certain change in the macroeconomic system, etc., etc. So I would discuss inputs and outputs with my funders. That I can do on a more time-bound basis. But the funder must recognize, and this is the conversation I have with them, that there is a longer-term outcome that we hope to get and eventually an impact that we want to see. And that is a longer term. The problem that happens is, me NGO is only talking impact. And I am saying, 20 saal mein dunya badalne wala. And that guy is saying, boss, tell me in the next 1 year, I have to give my CSR report out. Tell me what will you do. So he is talking at one language, we are talking a different language. We have to start finding this common language and getting them to understand this sequence, let's say a framework of input, output, outcomes and impact. And we are able to go down and be able to explain, okay, in the next quarter, what can I do? It may not be the impact parameter at all. So I think that equal relationship with the funder, being able to equally teach the funder and share with the funder, what you've learned from the field. And I'm telling you, all funders are willing to listen. I mean, they may have an arrogance of capital, but in terms of a learning journey, they're all interested to learn what needs to happen. Of course, there are exceptions, Suresh. And like I said, you have to reject those exceptions. I mean, you should not go with people who you believe you cannot have those conversations, because it will do harm to you in the longer run. And the point Sreedhar and I were talking about is, I think there is a lot of money in the sector. I think we are all getting a little too desperate for the money. One thing I'm beginning to realize is that there is a lot of money, far more than all of you need. I mean, today, I cannot tell you how many organizations I'm having conversations with who are saying, boss, I want somebody who can spend the money by 31st March. They're not able to find people to, can you digest the money? If I give you, $5 million, can you digest that? So actually, there is a lot of money. So I think we should be even more sensible about the money we take and the money we don't take, and not be desperate about money. I really think we should get out of this desperation. And it's very funny, right? It's like job hunting. The more desperate you are, the less chance that you will get it also. The less desperate you are, the more you seem to want to get. And it's, I say this to a lot of my students today, and this is a little bit of a digression, but suddenly it struck me that it's relevant. When I go to a funder and I ask for money, I've very rarely got money. I've got a lot of gyan. I've gone asking for fund and they'll give me gyan for 2 hours. कि boss ये करना चाहिए, have you thought of that? वहाँ क्यों नहीं गया? इससे बात क्यों नहीं किया? वो research क्यों नहीं किया? वो book क्यों नहीं पढ़ा? अरे बाबा, I didn't come here for ज्ञान. I wanted money. Money नहीं है तो बोल दो, मैं फुटता हूँ यहाँ से. Now I found that the way to get money is ask them for ज्ञान. It is fascinating. You go and tell a funder, this is what I want to do. Please give me some ideas. You know what they say? They might give you some ideas, but 9 out of 10 times they'll say, अरे मैं कौन सा idea देने वाला हूँ? Idea तो तुम्हारे पास है. You're the people doing work on the ground. The equation is very different. It's an adult equation suddenly. So yeah, we need to find ways of making that conversation an equal conversation.